Yvonne may have tagged along with us in our Valley 4 adventure, but it's only now that her banner is arriving, appearing as a 6-star cryo striker who specializes in high ultimate burst damage and, as of her release, being one of the best crit scalers in the game. So let's go through each of her skills and what they do, the weapon and build options, as well as some teams and rotations to get you started. But before we do, I should mention that this video is sponsored by Griftline, the publishers of Arknight's Enfield. Use my link in the description and pins to register, or just download the game. It's worth noting that this was made on the creator server, so there may be differences between what is shown here and live. Do check the pins for any updates or changes. With that out of the way, what does Yvonne even do? In terms of stats, she has an intellect main attribute and agility as secondary. Like many strikers in the game, Yvonne is a character who specializes on consuming inflictions, where she distinguishes herself by quite literally having no way to apply them. Rather, by using her battle skill on enemies that have either cryo or nature inflictions, she can apply full solidification and gets bonus ultimate energy that scales with the number of stacks consumed. If she applies solidification with her battle skill, then she gets a steep damage bonus to her next final strike and immediately shortcuts to it, skipping all other basic attack sequences before it. This is good, as it's on landing final strikes on enemies with solidification that Yvonne gets access to her combo skill, which itself applies solidification. As one of her talents increases critical damage to solidified enemies, this is great for her. It all repeats until she can use her ultimate, where Yvonne becomes a controlled operator and fires a barrage of attacks that ends on an enhanced final strike. If the enemy is solidified, then she consume it at the end of her ultimate to launch an additional attack that's twice as strong as said final strike. So the gist of her game plan is simple. Build inflictions, consume them with her battle skill, and loop final strikes on the full solidifications from it and her combo skill, building enough ultimate energy to unload her burst. All of this sounds easy, but in practice it does demand a fair bit of planning. As she gets more ultimate energy per infliction stack consumed, to minimize SP wastage you'd want to maximize her stacks, but often it can be better to not do so, as she'd be missing out on ultimate energy gain from her battle skill's full solidification. The ultimate is strong, but the time it takes means having to be mindful of solidification timers, not to mention enemy attacks that can interrupt Yvonne if not careful. And sure, Yvonne works off cryo or nature inflictions, but mixing them up leads to reactions that delay her ultimate energy build. And honestly, cryo is outright better than nature here, owing to her talents. Freezing Point gives Yvonne 20% critical damage to enemies that have an active cryo infliction, with this effect being doubled against solidified enemies. As it applies only to cryo and not nature, it clearly favors teams that prioritize building the former. Granted, much of Yvonne's damage is against solidified enemies where the full bonus is active. This is especially relevant for her battle skill damage, as solidification is applied with the damage stick, meaning that it always benefits in full from the bonus crit damage. Still, 20% here and there is a nice to have. Note that this does not stack with itself. It's 20% crit damage when an enemy has a cryo infliction, or 40% crit damage when an enemy is solidified. There is no gain on having inflictions and reactions overlapping. Her next talent is Barrage of Technology, and it's how Yvonne gets final strike shortcuts. It enhances her battle skill so that when it applies solidification, the next basic attack is converted into a final strike and gains a 50% damage bonus. Keep in mind that this is applied to Yvonne only. It is not the next basic attack of the controlled operator, it's the one who has the talent. The end result is that there is very little reason to not have her as the controlled operator. In fact, you notice that if swapping out of Yvonne, she will use up the shortcut even as an inactive character, wasting the final strike. Since it's the next basic attack that becomes a final strike, not the next basic attack string or set, it's best to reserve battle skill users to after final strike, allowing Yvonne to loop them for more effective SP recovery and stagger build. This isn't always ideal though, as some rotations may need you to speed up or delay certain final strikes to best align with enemy movesets and stagger thresholds. As mentioned before, this final strike shortcut is very useful as it's a perfect transition into her combo skill, Flash Freezer E37. It's triggered when the controlled operator performs a final strike on an enemy with solidification. It has a cooldown of 20 seconds at base, is reduced to 19 seconds at rank 9 and 18 seconds at mastery 3. Yvonne will throw out a frosty body that will boost her damage 4 times, lasting 3 seconds, ending with an explosion that forcibly applies solidification. The very first hit will generate 10 additional ultimate energy on top of the combo skill's default energy gain, whereas the final explosion builds 10 stagger. Note that the energy bonus only triggers once. Even if multiple enemies are hit, it will not change the total energy generation from this ability. There are a few other things to be aware of when using this skill. First, it has a vacuum effect. On smaller enemies, it will gather them up with every pulse. This is helpful as 3 seconds can be a very long time against mobile targets. Unfortunately, this effect is not present against bosses, so it can, and will, miss if not properly managed. In my runs, it happened very frequently, being one of Yvonne's biggest weaknesses. Even just the movement of some enemy attacks can be enough to take them out, so planning around it is a necessity. And second, the delay between cast and explosion is not necessarily a bad thing. As the solidification is applied at the very end, this can be helpful and at times needed to get the most value out of Yvonne's ultimate. Cryoblasting Pistolier is said ultimate, with much of her kit and build revolving around this skill. It has a whopping 220 energy cost, and on use, it will force Yvonne to become the controlled operator and gives her access to an enhanced basic attack for 7 seconds. This is split into 3 distinct phases, a set of 3 single pistol shots, followed by 8 double pistol unloads, then a spin into a rapid fire barrage of 64 shots, ending on an enhanced final strike. It doesn't matter how long she's been firing for, or even if she hasn't fired at all, once the 7 seconds run out, the next attack will link into the enhanced final strike. This gets an even bigger damage bonus if it lands on an enemy with solidification, as it will consume it to deal a massive burst of damage when doing so. Each and every hit will grant a stacking 3% crit rate buff, maxing out at 10 stacks for 30% crit rate total. If the buff is capped, then Yvonne also gets a 60% crit damage buff. When combined with the 40% from her freezing point talent on solidified enemies and the 50% that all operators have by default, that's a 150% crit damage bonus during her ultimate. Note that unlike similar install type ultimates like Lavathing's Twilight, there is no pause to the timer. It's 7 seconds, period. If Yvonne uses her combo or battle skill halfway through, this is a damage loss as it's time spent not firing. The lack of a pause is also an issue if dodging to reposition. Although time stop from perfect dodges do seem to apply, even then there is still a partial time loss from the dodge recovery animation. And just in case, the final strike shortcut from her talent takes priority, which also takes up ultimate time. Its final strike timer is quite lenient though, as it will be stocked even after the ultimate timer ends, being a sort of guaranteed end to the ultimate state itself. It isn't eternal though, with the true timer for the final attack cast being visible as a set of ring effects around Yvonne, which can expire. Now, it is possible to animation cancel some of the ultimate attacks. The first single pistol shots can be dodged out of after a single hit, transitioning into the double pistol unloads, but trying to dodge out of them simply reduces the number of total shots. This isn't even meaningfully faster than simply doing the shots in full, so it's best avoided. And as it truly is a fixed 7 seconds of firing, this can lead to problems with solidification alignment. A 1 stack solidification lasts only 6 seconds, and a 2 stack is 7 seconds. So in theory, Yvonne would need at least a 3 stack solidification before her ultimate cast to benefit from its additional attack, right? Not quite. First, there's nothing stopping other operators from using their skills and ultimates during this time. It's perfectly possible for solidification to be applied after Yvonne begins firing without use of her skills. And second, that isn't even required. Remember, her combo skill solidification is applied with a delay, which means that in many rotations, the best way to get full value out of Yvonne's ultimate is to simply use her combo skill right before it. That way, its full solidification applies after the ultimate cast, but before its final strike. And if you're worried that because it's a no-stack full solidification it'd have a shorter duration, that's of no concern, as Yvonne's combo skill specifically applies an 8-second long solidification, covering her whole ultimate. Most of her enhanced basic attacks then benefit from her talent's crit damage buff, and there's enough time left to get the reaction consumption effect. Of course, that's easier said than done. As mentioned before, bosses can walk away from her combo skill, potentially missing out on the solidification. And to maximize damage from the ultimate, Yvonne wants to tear it down and move as little as possible. While it's okay to tank some hits, she can be interrupted by heavy attacks, so dodges are at times needed. Not only to avoid interrupts, but to avoid dying, as that can be a very real concern in Umbral Monument with her. Setting up the ideal conditions to maximize the time spent and damage dealt by this ultimate, like with staggers, is the goal of many rotations. To even get to use her ultimate though, considering its ridiculous 220 energy cost, Yvonne needs an effective way to build to it. Her combo skill's additional gain helps, but the star of the show is her battle skill, Burba Bomb Vita. It has a throw freezing bomb that consumes cryo and nature inflictions, forcibly applying solidification when doing so and generating a bonus 10 ultimate energy. As is the case with all forced reactions and consumption, the level of solidification scales with the number of stacks consumed. Another important property that scales with infliction stacks is the ultimate energy gain that the skill provides. Separate from the 10 energy on full solidification, it also generates an additional 30 energy for every stack consumed. This means that it alone can generate up to 136.5 energy, 6.5 from SP spend, 10 from the solidification, and then 120 from 30 times full stacks. Don't forget that it's on getting a solidification with this battle skill that the barrage of technology talent is activated, making for an easy transition into Yvonne's combo skill. There are some caveats though. While the full solidification does apply to multiple enemies, the additional ultimate energy gain effect can only trigger once. Hitting 3 enemies with 1 cryo infliction each only counts as 1 stack, not 3, so building energy isn't any faster on multiple targets. And as is the case with Yvonne's combo skill, this can also miss, being a thrown projectile with travel time, so watch out for mobile enemies that can juke it. If you can work around these though, then everything comes together for a smooth setup. Build inflictions through teammates, battle skill to generate ultimate energy, final strike on a solidified enemy for a combo skill, then ultimate, benefiting from the lingering solidification and having the reaction reapplied in time for the final strike. And final strikes are what underpins the whole rotation. Not the ultimate enhanced one, but the regular kind. Since she's likely to be the controlled operator, it's a skill that gets used often, and unfortunately it's terrible. When compared to other 5-hit basic attack strings, it has decent multipliers, especially on her sequence 5, being the final strike that's enhanced by her talent. Unfortunately, despite her being a hand cannon user, many of the attacks are treated as melee hits. If the enemy jumps out, it won't track them. Her final strike has an especially narrow range, even the slightest of enemy movements means that it misses completely. It's not possible to overstate how tricky this is to use. Even with a shortcut to Final Strike, it will miss. In fact, said shortcut is often the cause for misses, so being mindful of enemy attack patterns is very important. It does have a pierce effect to it, I suppose, making it handy at hitting multiple enemies. And it has a neat animation cancel point on its third sequence. Normally, Yvonne summons and fires 3 little bots, but this can be dodge cancelled out of as soon as a single one appears. The time save is slight, but it does add up over multiple strings, leading to better stagger and SP build over the course of a fight. Considering that Xaihi, an operator who demands final strikes for her cryo infliction, is a good pair for Yvonne, this can sometimes help shift timelines forwards. With all this in mind, skill priorities should be clear. Considering that Yvonne is all about gearing up for her ultimate burst, that's the #1 skill to level. Following that, her basics and combo skill are both quite important. Basics from a damage standpoint, as she's going to be the controlled operator and gets damage bonuses to it from her talent, whereas combo skill matters from a cooldown standpoint, going down by 1 second at rank 9 and mastery 3. Lastly is her battle skill, which is still good to level for damage but nothing else. Technically, leveling battle skill would provide a fair bit more damage than combo skill, but having lower cooldowns can make some rotations more flexible, so I'd recommend prioritizing it over battle skills. On the topic of damage, it's worth covering Yvonne's builds, starting with weapon choices. If all you're looking for are numbers, then here's a handy sheet to get you started. All calculations shown in this video were not done by me, but by trusted friends over at datafield.cc, being Catalyst and low priority. Although I did provide some assistance and you might find lin tabs on the sheets, it'd be disingenuous to imply I've done the calc, so full credit goes to them. All calcs are publicly available to be peer-reviewed and validated, so rather than trusting them or myself blindly, I'd fully encourage you to have a look at the sheets and come to your own conclusions. This is still seeing live updates and may be touched on again after Yvonne's banner is live, so if there's any disparity between the sheets and the data in this video, trust the sheets. To cover off some recommendations and reasonings though, it's worth going through the 3 main options that Yvonne has. Her signature, Artsy Tyrannical, the Battle Pass weapon, Navigator, and the standard 6-star, Wedge. All of them are incredibly similar in what they provide, just that they do it in different ways. Artsy Tyrannical has 156 intellect and 19.5% crit rate in its main stat line, with an unconditional 25.6% boost to cryo damage and a 22.4% cryo damage bonus that stacks 3 times, lasting 30 seconds at P0. Altogether, this weapon can provide up to 92.8% in cryo damage. There are conditions to it though, with it needing battle or combo skill uses by Yvonne to crit, and most importantly, having each stack's duration be counted separately. Thankfully, uptime isn't usually too big a problem, as it can be triggered by every battle and combo skill crit. Since a combo skill has 5 hits total, even if a battle skill doesn't trigger the effect, you can expect at least some of the combo skill ticks to crit, meaning that you don't need to be too lucky to upkeep it. Navigator, the Battle Pass alternative, also has 156 intellect, but instead of crit rate, it has 43.3% cryo damage. It then offers an unconditional 5.6% crit rate bonus, as well as 3.2% crit rate and 5.6% cryo and nature damage increases when applying solidification or corrosion, doubling if it's the wielder that applies it. This adds up to a total of 12% in crit rate and 54.5% in damage bonuses. Honestly, it's a significantly worse version than her signature, with barely over half of the crit rate and almost 40% in damage bonus difference. Even with only a singular crit stack on Artsy, it's likely to be out-damaging Navigator owing to the disparity on crit rate. It is, however, unfair to compare them at P0, as it is possible to eventually P5 Navigator with a protocolized weapon pattern from the Battle Pass, even if it might take another patch to do so. The numbers then change to a total of 21% in crit rate and 62.9% in damage bonuses, making it a fair bit more competitive, but still far behind Artsy. In fact, it's only slightly better than Wedge. Unlike Artsy and Navigator, it has a main attribute bonus instead of intellect, being slightly lower at 132. It does, however, also have crit rate, matching Artsy with 19.5%. For its passive, it offers an unconditional 19.2% arts damage bonus, which falls in the same bucket as crowd damage, being further increased by 12.8% when casting a battle skill, and another 25.6% on top when applying an arts reaction with it for 15 seconds each. And yes, these do stack with each other, not just themselves. They aren't overriding each other, so don't worry. Considering that Bum Vita is both a battle skill and triggers a reaction, maintaining this is laughably easy. At P0, that's 57.6% in damage bonus, which is respectable given its crit rate. In fact, a P5 Wedge can even come out ahead of Artsy depending on the team, as its total damage bonus goes up to 100.8%. It does suffer from its lower main stat, but between stat saturation levels and a not so unlikely lack of full uptime on Artsy's effect, it can range from being marginally worse to an outright improvement. So to recap, Artsy Tyrannical is head and shoulders above even a P5 Navigator and a P0 Wedge. Its match with Navigator in its intellect, match with Wedge in its crit rate, and massively outpaces either of them in damage bonuses. But it does need crits on battle and combo skills, so it demands Yvonne to be built and may struggle with consistency. A P5 Wedge could technically be better than a P0 Artsy depending on circumstances, but that's something I'd wager not many players will have right now. The same, however, cannot be said for Navigator, which needs multiple dupes to match even a P0 wedge. If you're willing to spend those pericalized weapon patterns and give up on the ones from a future battle pass, then by all means go for it. But the more time passes, the more likely you are to get wedge copies, so pick it at your own risk. As for gear, it's a bit more convoluted. To simplify it a little, here's another handy sheet with numbers from Datafield, but as is always the case with calcs, it doesn't quite tell the full story. It's worth explaining what it is that this actually means, starting with stat picks, because thankfully that's an easy one. Yvonne likes crit, and in case you haven't noticed, she has absolutely no attack percent bonuses in her kit or weapons. Any smidge of attack percent is going to be good, as she's so unsaturated on the stat that its value skyrockets comparative to other games. So MI Security, which provides both crit rate and attack percent, is as good a set as we can get. Now, is it possible to take a page from some Lavatane builds and run pure ultimate gain efficiency to spam Cryoblasting Pistolier? Yes. Is it fun to try and spend more time being a turret than a character? Also yes. Is it actually good? Sadly, no. It's sorely lacking in any form of damaging stat boosts, and again, Yvonne likes crit owing to her ridiculous crit damage scaling. Not to mention that if you happen to run her signature, you want crits for its effect. The very same points also make Pulsar Labs not really worth considering. Not only is it lacking in crit, its bonus is predominantly in damage percent, something that Yvonne gets plenty of with her weapons, gear, and teammates. It's also lacking on full stat matches, giving a whole lot of will, which Yvonne gets no benefit from. The individual set pieces, though, can see some variety. For gloves, the best option for damage would be MI Security Hands PPE, having a double match on attributes and providing basic attack damage. Her ultimate, which enhances basic attacks, gets full benefit from this. This does mean having lower crit rate, which MI Security Hands PPE T1 could provide, but sadly it's only a single stat match, namely Intellect. That doesn't make it worse though, as if you don't have fully edge essences and Artifice crit rate stat lines, it can outperform, so it's a worthwhile holdover until Yvonne is fully invested. For Kit 1, use MI Security Toolkit. It also has a double match on attributes and provides crit rate, a much needed stat. It's just a good piece all around. When it comes to everything else though, it does get situational. For Kit 2, a second MI Security Toolkit would do just fine, but in theory, assuming you're fully invested Yvonne with edge essences and maximally artificed attributes, Link's Lab, providing a single intellect stat match and a ridiculous amount of main attribute bonus, would be the highest damaging piece. I do mean it when I say fully invested, as not only would you need high base attributes to get the most value out of its effect, it means giving up on crit rate. Very much an endgame piece to eventually work towards, not one to be used right out of the gate. As for the armor, the best overall pick is MI Security Overalls. Much like Hands PPE, matches both attributes and buffs Yvonne's basic attacks with its effect. I would stop here, but depending on the number of teammate battle skills and infliction stacks, I'm aware that some teams can struggle to have enough ultimate energy. So a Bone Crusher heavy armor, which has a double stat match, albeit flipped, and provides ultimate gain efficiency can work out. This is less damage overall though. Not only in terms of stats, but builds, as it means giving up on Link's Lab so as to not break the MI Security set effect. But it'd be remiss of me to not mention it as it can be required for certain rotations. On the ultimate gain efficiency topic, Redeemer Seal can also sometimes be used, but I haven't familiarized myself with its rotations, so I can't comment. This does take us to an important tidbit of info, that being Yvonne's ultimate energy breakpoints. Rotations tend to have one of three distributions. 5 arts inflictions total over the course of 2 Yvonne battle skills and 2 combo skills, so 5, 2, 2. 4 arts inflictions total over the course of 3 Yvonne battle skills and 2 combo skills, so 4, 3, 2. Or 4 arts inflictions total over the course of 2 Yvonne battle skills and 2 combo skills, so 4, 2, 2. The reason why the number of Yvonne battle skills is especially important is because of the 10 additional ultimate energy from solidification applied that it provides. A 4 stack infliction being consumed by 1 battle skill is less energy than if it was split between 2 sets of 2 inflictions, being consumed by 2 battle skills. And that's not including the 6.5 team-wide generation from SP consumption either. A 5-2-2 setup is the safest. 30 energy per infliction times 5 adds up to 150. Then 2 battle skills is 33 energy, 13 from SP consumption and another 20 from solidification bonuses. And lastly, 2 combo skills would yield 40 energy, 10 as standard, then 10 per additional gain times 2. A total energy count of 223. Considering Yvonne's ultimate costs 220, this means that even without any teammate battle skill uses, it's enough for an ultimate. The 4-3-2 setup is the one I used most. 30 energy per infliction times 4 adds up to 120. Then 3 battle skills is 49.5 energy, 19.5 from SP consumption and another 30 from solidification bonuses. And that's before 40 energy from 2 combo skills. This only adds up to 209.5, which is 10.5 energy short of an ultimate. Thankfully, we are using other characters as battle skills in rotations, and with us getting 6.5 energy for every 100 SP used, 2 of them is enough to take us over 220. The 4-2-2 setup, however, is one that would demand some kind of ultimate gain efficiency. being 120 energy from inflictions, 33 from battle skills, and 40 from combo skills. That's 193 total, leaving a deficit of 27 energy. To get enough for Yvonne's ultimate would demand 5 teammate battle skills, which is steep. If we need 4 inflictions, assuming 1 per teammate battle skill, having 5 casts becomes redundant. Rotations that can't or struggle to apply inflictions without SP use would need to run Bone Crusher heavy armor to make up for this disparity, or get Yvonne's P1. It's quite literally just 1 point in energy that's missing, but it is what it is. Which is a good segue onto Yvonne's teams, as they're what will determine her rotations. She's honestly in a bit of an awkward spot. There is no character who can offer a balanced supply of low-cost inflictions to fuel her ultimate energy requirements, and this is very much felt in her rotations. I suppose one character that can arguably fit the criteria would be Fluorite. Her combo skill applies matching inflictions, as does her ultimate. As a 4-star, she's accessible and can be slotted into most Yvonne teams without issue. Problem is, she has a ridiculous 40-second combo skill cooldown, going down to 38 only at M3. She can run Frontiers to help reduce this somewhat, and Fluorite's P5 does help, but not to a meaningful extent. And do keep in mind that both it and her ultimate demand 2 inflictions to be up on the enemy beforehand. As good as it is for Yvonne to maximize the number of arts infliction stacks on enemies before using her battle skill, she does want to use it with some degree of frequency, not only for ultimate energy, but also as its primary way for her to access her combo skill. Neither of these are problematic per se, but if using Fluorite on the team, you will want to route in such a way that accommodates these restrictions. To highlight this, Yvonne is looking for either 4 or 5 infliction applications, but Fluorite is stopping it up in sets of 3. So in practice, rotations end up following a sort of 4+1 approach. I suppose I should stand corrected. The problem that Yvonne has isn't even not having good infliction build, it's making sure that what is there has good alignment. Not just with enemy behaviors, but buffs, which is something that Fluorite is completely lacking in. Her kit offers nothing beyond inflictions, and there is no weapon or gear set that helps make up for the damage contribution she fails to bring to a team. For all my complaints, she's still a fine pick from the units we have at the moment, being one of the few that is able to provide inflictions without expending SP for it, having the potential to be especially useful in single cycle fights. Just be sure to tailor rotations around her gimmicks. Estella is another 4-star option, and one that turns out to be surprisingly useful. Technically, she can offer cheap cryo inflictions owing to her talent returning SP on Shatter, which synergizes well with Yvonne's 4 solidifications. But do not forget, return is not recover. Returned SP will not provide ultimate energy, which may mess up with some breakpoints, so be mindful of this. She also suffers from many of the same issues as Fluorite, with no meaningful buffs or supportive weapon choices. However, not only is her personal damage slightly less objectionable, she can technically make use of Eternal Shironite owing to the susceptibility on her combo skill, or Swordmaster to build more stagger that can help align certain rounds, both being fine alternatives to Yingling. Usually you're running either Fluorite or Estella, with which one being used somewhat influenced by other teammates, one of which is Alesh. Believe it or not, he turns out to be one of the best operators to run with Yvonne, being a mainstay in most of the teams I used. At first, it doesn't really make much sense though. Alesh's battle skill consumes cryo inflictions, but that's a very bad thing, as all of them should be given to Yvonne. His combo skill also demands art reactions to be consumed, yet Yvonne only does that during her ultimate, so what's the catch here? And this is where one must be acutely aware that Enfield is a team building game. Yvonne isn't consuming reactions, but Shatter is. When running characters like Estella or Gilberta, it's easy enough to work with their combo skills as a trigger for Alesh's. Not only is this a nice SP bonus to help speed up rotations, but unlike the 4-stars, this can buff. At P3 and above, catching a rare fin is giving 15% attack. As mentioned before, that's a strong multiplier for Yvonne, which is further increased by Thermite Cutter, with a full 2-stack uptime and rotations being maintained. I would have said that Alesh can run Frontiers for its 16% damage bonus, and indeed he can, but I found it better to build him for pure ultimate energy and secondary attributes. Alesh's ultimate not only has decent enough SP recovery, but it's one of the few ways of applying cryo stacks with no SP cost. While Fluorite can technically do so, the fact Alesh's stack build is unconditional helps a lot. This is in large part because they're synergistic in talents too, as Alesh gains full ultimate energy with every solidification. Between Yvonne's battle and combo skills, he can get a fair bit from reactions. If Alesh is at P4, with 2 Yvonne battle and 1 combo skill, assuming a 0 ultimate energy start, he needs 56% in ultimate gain efficiency to be able to use his ultimate in time for the burst. This is something that can be done with only Eternal Shironite Gloves T1 and a single Redeemer Seal, which together would give 60% when Artificed. The rest can then be made up with Frontiers pieces for intellect and secondary attribute bonuses, enhancing his chances at pulling a rare fin. If not at P4 however, he would need 83.5% in ultimate gain efficiency. This can be made up with other pieces like a second Redeemer Seal, even if it comes at the cost of intellect. But of course that's a rather niche concern, as if Alesh is not at P3, rare fins aren't buffing the team, so it doesn't matter. And these breakpoints are only needed at 0 ultimate energy starts. I'll cover this in more detail when we get to rotations, but in short, the requirements decrease to a meager 3.1% at P4 and 21.3% at P0, allowing for Alesh to run a full Frontier set and still have enough ultimate gain efficiency. All this is to say, Alesh is good. Not ideal, mind you, but out of the units we have on release, he's certainly one of the better picks. Another 5-star that's a particularly good pick is Xaihi. He synergizes surprisingly well with Yvonne. While her Cryo-Infliction build is locked behind landing 2 final strikes while her battle skill is active, Yvonne can shortcut to final strikes after her own battle skill. In practice, that means that you end up having to hold on to Xaihi's combo skill for a bit, as it can come around too fast. In fact, using her skill too early can genuinely ruin rotations. Yvonne's ultimate enhances her basic attacks, and the final hit is a final strike, which means that it itself counts towards her combo skill trigger. The limiting factor aren't final strikes really, it's enemy patterns and SP. Xaihi is also a really strong buffer. As it stands, cryo teams in this game are actually just Xaihi teams. She has an effectively permanent uptime of 15% art simplification, 20% of AP1, and gets up to 36% cryo and nature ramp on her ultimate, lasting more than enough to cover all of Yvonne's burst. That too gets enhanced by potentials, getting a times 1.1 multiplier at P5. Then there's her talent, which provides 10% cryo damage taken, an incredibly rare multiplier the enemies hit while under cryo infliction or solidification. It may only last 5 seconds, but with Yvonne's full solidification, that's not really a concern. Xaihi can use either Detonation Unit or Chivalric Virtues, the former of which gives damage taken and the latter of which buffs attack percent. I take it I don't need to say why either of these are valuable. Detonation Unit does demand some route planning due to its Art burst requirement, but it's workable enough. So she can provide cryo stacks, has strong buff potential, and can rock powerful supportive weapons. Oh, and she heals. Owing to her constant amp from battle skill and ultimate use, she can also rock the Eternal Shuronite set, giving another 16% damage bonus. In practice though, this isn't always needed, as building her with Frontiers pieces for higher intellect through secondary attribute bonuses can work out better, as her ultimate amp scales with it. It really is no issue to do so even from a resource perspective. With an 80 base energy cost ultimate, she needs only 37.2% ultimate gain efficiency if at P2, or 52.4% if not. The former is easily attainable with Tidefall Light Armor and Eternal Shuronite Gloves T1, using Frontiers tubes for kits, whereas the latter can be achieved by swapping out one of the kits for Redeemer Seal and using a Frontiers Armor T3 for secondary attribute bonus instead, assuming all are Artifice that is. Of course, Eternal Shuronite set is still good to have, and Gilberta can run it. She's in a similar situation as Alesh, where on the surface she doesn't seem all that impressive. While her ultimate provides a ridiculous amount of susceptibility, it doesn't last all that long, so it won't cover Yvonne's whole ultimate. She builds nature rather than cryo stacks and has to spend 100 SP for it, so it isn't all that efficient either. Not to mention that it's annoying enough having to deal with enemies moving out of Yvonne's combo skill, so having them jump out of Gilberta's too is even more frustrating. But again, like Alesh, this is a team building game. Her combo skill applying lift is great for shadows, a strong point of synergy in Yvonne teams, and the energy breakpoint values for casters, like Xaihi, can actually be lower with Gilberta owing to her ultimate gain efficiency on her talent. Her ultimate provides an unconditional nature stack build, which turns out to be an important factor for looping rotations and keeping them SP neutral, or at times even SP positive. And of course, she's an arts unit user. Delivery Guaranteed is an especially powerful weapon with great uptime, and she can always run Stanza of Memorials as a 5-star option. Even with the short uptime on her ultimate susceptibility, it's still a ridiculously high multiplier. As it triggers Eternal Shuronite's effect, it can free up Xaihi to focus exclusively on secondary attributes. Yvonne's ultimate split is 3, 8, then 64, so having it be up for more than 85% of its shots, and have the actual hard-hitting final strike and solidification consumption bonus still benefit means it's more than enough. She does need a fair bit of ultimate energy though, namely 71.5% to ensure rotations are stable past the first cycle, but that's not a problem, as she's likely to run Shuronite anyways, with 2 auxiliary arms as well as a Gloves T1 giving her more than enough when Artificed without needing Delivery Guaranteed. There are, of course, more teammate options for Yvonne, although I'd say they're a bit more niche. You can use Perlica, building her with full Arts Intensity and Stanza of Memorials. She can be especially effective for full ultimate energy start speedruns, where Fluorite or Alesh's extra infliction build isn't as valuable. If at P4 or above, where she gets an even stronger electrification, she's an incredibly competitive buffer, especially with how easy it is to trigger her combo skill that applies it. Ardelia can work too. She has both corrosion and art susceptibility, and if properly timed can have both up at the target simultaneously. Her signature is Dreams of the Starry Beach, which can provide an arts damage taken multiplier, allowing for some slightly ridiculous triple arts unit comps that focus entirely on a single ultimate burst. And you could use Snowshine, having arguably the cheapest cryo infliction and stagger build out of current operators. I wouldn't recommend her for any kind of optimized speedrun content, owing to her lack of buffs and supportive weapon choices, but she's a decent defensive option who can still provide some value through Eternal Shuronite set effects. If you aren't the kind to plan out routes and align resources, then she's a relatively easy to use pick. Rest button when enemy attacks, then Yvonne battles go every so often. Her ornament can even work to salvage rotations that don't have Yvonne's combo skill timed correctly, being able to apply solidification on demand to rescue sloppy runs. Last Rite can sometimes come up as a potential partner. Her battle skill can build up cryo inflictions relatively fast, especially when considering Yvonne's ability to shortcut to final strikes. Problem is, both Yvonne and Last Rite want to consume cryo inflictions, and with Last Rite not being able to generate energy through teammate skill use, she'll always lag behind with her ornament, building it only through battle skill casts. Well, I suppose you can technically get a 0-stack Last Rite combo skill, but a pure Yvonne team would be better, as would a pure Last Rite. A team building game means it's important to factor in how all characters synergize with one another for best performance. After all, technically you could run Endmin, a sort of pseudo-physical comp that makes use of Estella and Gilberta's vulnerability stack applications, as well as solidifications from Yvonne to get constant shatters. You'd almost certainly be better off simply running a traditional shadow lineup with lower rarity characters, like Endmin, Shin, Alesh, and Estella, as Yvonne and Gilberta are having an identity crisis in this team. But hey, it functions? With how lenient the quote-unquote endgame is at the moment, playing what you find funnest will always work best. Even with all of these character and team options, Yvonne is in an awkward position. Her teams do feel incomplete. That's not necessarily a bad thing though. It just means that she's perfectly set up to benefit from future operators, who may bring the right combinations of arts inflictions, SP economy, and buff value to make her shine. Now that we've covered Yvonne and her teams, how about going through some sample rotations? I must flag this with a disclaimer that I did not have invested units in the creator server. Low level skills, no essences, and no artifice gear. No Orleans either, so I was stuck with a base stamina which made animation cancelling basic 3s alongside final strikes not feasible in practice. So take this as a springboard for you to work from. Look to understand the principle behind the rotations, as with a build team, tailoring your game plan to an individual encounter would be best. With that out of the way, let's see how Yvonne works.
Time to tip my heels.
I wish you the best of fortune.
The first is a 4-3-2 rotation, that being 4 inflictions, 3 battle, and 2 combo skills. We begin by casting Xaihi's battle skill, setting up amp buffs and letting us build towards her combo skill. Before we go through 2 final strikes, use a Gilberta skill for a singular nature infliction. But once it's up, Yvonne battle skill to consume it and apply full solidification. But do not use combo skills just yet. Wait for Yvonne to land a final strike for her own combo skill, then unload a lot. This builds a cryo infliction and triggers a shatter for Alesh's combo skill. If it's a rare fin, all the better. From this point on, simply loop final strikes to build SP. We could use Yvonne's battle skill again here, but delaying it to work around Xaihi's battle skill helps better align timelines and buffs. Once at a little over 1.5 bars of SP, use Xaihi's battle skill, doing 1 final strike, then going for Yvonne's battle skill as soon as it's up, with the shortcut triggering Xaihi's combo skill. Do not use it just yet though. Start working towards 1 more final strike per stagger, and around the basic 3 point, use Alesh's ultimate, followed by Xaihi's combo skill. If she's on detonation unit, make sure it hits after Alesh so that she gets the arts burst trigger. This is just enough energy for her ultimate, where we get its bonus for the final strike and the Yvonne battle skill on the 2 cryo stacks. That's then followed by 1 last final strike into Yvonne's and Gilberta's combo skills, being just enough to stagger Rodan before his scripted attacks. Gilberta's shatter triggers Alesh's combo skill, ideally setting us up with a nice rare fin bonus, while Yvonne gears up to unload. As soon as she transitions into the 3rd part of the ultimate, use Gilberta's ultimate, which will last for the remaining burst. Due to Gilberta's ultimate happening after Alesh's combo skill, time stop mechanics means that Alesh's cooldowns are back up in time for Yvonne's solidification consumption, giving another combo skill use, all the while having enough time on the stagger to get a cheeky finisher on Yvonne. From there, the rotation begins again, except that there's no need to use Gilberta's battle skill as her ultimate has set up the nature stack for us. The SP gain from the finisher makes all of this SP positive, but each and every subsequent cycle can be a little faster. Although this isn't necessarily a good thing as it can lead to misaligned staggers, so be attentive to final strikes. Energy economy is fine too. Alesh here almost has his ultimate up again, as he benefits from Yvonne's battle skill and its solidification, her combo skill solidification, and 2 of his own combo skill uses. It's why I mentioned Alesh only needs 3.1% ultimate gain efficiency at P4 and 21.3% at P0. He's genuinely overloaded on energy after the first cycle. Xaihi also uses her ultimate before Yvonne's battle skill, so despite not getting energy from Gilberta's battle skill, she's got that 6.5 from Yvonne already, so all good. And Yvonne, well, we've already gone through her breakpoints. She only needs 2 ally battle skills here, and we get precisely that with Xaihi, so she's covered too. The only one that you need to be mindful of is Gilberta herself, but with the 71.5% ultimate gain efficiency she should be built with, that's more than enough. With all this in mind, let's go through the second rotation, being a 4-2-2 split, so 4 inflictions, 2 battle, and 2 combo skills. This is an example of a rotation that would need ultimate gain efficiency, as here we're running Alesh on a frontier set. Since he can't supply that free cryo infliction owing to a later ultimate, the SP has to go to Estella instead, cutting one of Yvonne's battle skills short. The concept though is almost exactly the same as the previous rotation. Begin by casting Xaihi's battle skill, but instead of using Gilberta's battle skill, we use Estella's for fast infliction. From there, another set of basics to buy time for speed to recover, and it's time for the first Yvonne battle skill, followed by a full set of combo skill unloads. Whereas normally we would Xaihi battle skill, since we can't rely on Alesh's ultimate, SP has to be spent on Estella's battle skill. We use hers and not just another Xaihi battle skill, as SP recovery rates combined with us not getting a Yvonne final strike shortcut at this point means that it's likely to misalign final strikes. So we bide our time until we can cast another Xaihi battle skill, making sure to time it so that it just about gets a trigger from an ongoing basic attack string. From there, just one more set of basics is going to be around enough to yield enough SP for Yvonne's battle skill. Work around enemy patterns and make sure to use Xaihi's combo skill, building up to a 3-stack round infliction and giving her the energy needed for an ultimate. Now it's time for the burst, with the second Yvonne battle skill followed by her and Estella's combo skill, taking Rodan to stagger point. Alesh's combo skill is triggered by Estella, and as soon as the SP regen ticks, making sure Frontiers, Thermites, and potentially Rare Fin buffs are up, use Estella's ultimate for damage and time stop. It must be done before Yvonne's combo skill triggers, as we don't want to shatter the solidification. All the while, Yvonne lands a finisher, and we animation cancel its recovery frames with the ultimate cast. It's not quite over yet though. Alesh now has his ultimate, so that can help set up the first cryo stack for the next rotation, allowing us to bypass Estella. Ideally you want to use it early, as depending on the time that it takes for you to cycle through attacks, he may have dropped a Thermite stack, so ultimate will top it up. But be careful to not be so early that cryo stacks drop instead. We can lessen that risk by using Xaihi's battle skill before the enhanced final strike of the ultimate. That way, after Alesh's combo skill triggers, we only need one more final strike for Xaihi's combo skill, restarting the rotation from the start. As with the previous rotation, stagger does come a little later, but that's of no concern, as using Estella's ultimate will be enough, creating a nice and consistent loop. If anything, there's too much SP at this point, allowing for faster cycling by making use of Estella's battle skill. these two are but a few of many possible rotations. Do note the opportunity for optimization here. As mentioned before, I couldn't even get character skill masteries, which could potentially open up some 3 Yvonne combo skill rounds with effective use of time stops. I do plan on rolling for Yvonne and her weapon on my personal account, so if I come across better alternatives, I'll do my best to share them. Potentials can also have an effect on her rotations, but it very much depends on the team. As before, here's a handy table with some number estimates, and as before, there's nuance to this. Flash Freezer is her P1, and it does a fair bit. It increases the radius of her combo skill by 20%, has a tick for damage 2 more times, and generates an additional 15 ultimate energy. Note that the extra hit does not make the skill take longer to detonate, it simply has attacks tick faster. And the range increase is especially welcome, considering how often it can miss at base. This potential can vary from a significant increase to negligible. If you use Artsy Tyrannical, more combo skill hits means more chances of it getting crits, making it a fair bit more consistent. If you're running Navigator or Wedge though, it's merely a minor damage increase. What's really good though is the ultimate energy bonus it provides. Now, rotations that would normally have to use Bone Crusher heavy armor can get by without it. This means Link Slab is once again a usable piece, which can add up to a near 17% increase in her personal damage output after all is said and done. On rotations that were already meeting energy breakpoints though, well, it really doesn't matter. You might be looking at, what, a 3% damage increase? So this can range from being one of the best limited unit potentials to being little more than a quality of life. Keep all this in mind if rolling for it. Flawless Creation is her P2 and it offers 20 intellect and 7% crit rate. This is actually quite good, especially if running Link Slab. It's more base intellect for the main attribute percent to multiply off of, and it makes up for the gear's lack of crit, so it alone can be a 6 or 7% damage increase. Pretty respectable. Tinker Power is her P3, being a straightforward 10% crit damage increase to her Freezing Point talent, which itself is also affected by the solidification bonus. That's effectively a times 1.5 increase to its potency, which translates to a 5% increase to her damage. Rebellious Mood is her P4, and it's another one that can potentially change rotations. It causes Yvonne's battle skill to return 10 SP if it hits only one enemy. This makes it worthless for multi-enemy encounters, but surprisingly useful against bosses. Remember, return is not recovery, but when factoring in the ultimate energy gain from her P1, this can really speed up rotations. For the first cycle, SP economy is a problem, so being able to shift things forwards is a big help. After all, depending on enemy attack patterns, things can come a little late without P4, which can misalign rotations and cause skills to miss. So in theory, it adds nothing, but in practice can open up new routes. Lastly is Expert Mech Crafter, Yvonne's P5, giving 10% attack and 30% crit rate during her ultimate cast. What can I say about it? It's damage, and it's from good stats too, amounting to a 9% increase to her total damage output. It should be at least that good given the price though, especially as a single Artsy Tyrannical dupe is adding roughly 5% to a P0 Yvonne, so if damage is all that matters to you, weapon copies do contribute. As for the character effect changes from getting her potentials, here's a side-by-side comparison between P1 and P5. Yvonne is the last limited character of 1.0, and there's no shortage of connections to her predecessors. She's remarkably similar to Lavating, with an install ultimate and a playstyle that revolves around it, all the while having Gilberta as one of her best partners. On the other hand, she distinguishes herself from her peers, almost ironically so. Rite spends most of her time struggling against multiple enemies with a single target focused combo skill, but shreds with a hard-hitting AoE ultimate. Whereas Yvonne has wide area attacks through her battle skill, vacuum properties with her combo skill, and even piercing properties to her final strike, but focuses on only a single target with her ultimate. While she does have clunky aspects to her with enemies moving out of her combo skill and a god-awful basic attack string, as an avid black mage enjoyer, there's something about turreting down and unloading hell that really activates my neurons. For the non-combat fanatics, there are other aspects to her that I'm sure will activate some neurons as well. If you are, however, interested in seeing more combat optimizations, be it through niche tech, breakdown of fundamental game mechanics, or detailed character guides like this one, why not like, share, subscribe, and ring the bell? I've got more videos coming. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.